But much more importantly, to introduce the report, I'm delighted that we have with us Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and to answer questions on the report, a clutch of 5 experts, many of whom are authors of this report. Ms. Ajar Jaimorzina Ducrest, Chief of our Transport and Connectivity and Logistics section. Ms. Rikke Monk Hansen, Chief of our Economic and Environment Statistics section. Mr. Oliver Paddison, Chief of our Countries with Special Needs section. And Mr. Manuel Castillo, a Senior Official from our Environment and Development section. I'm also pleased that we have Mr. Youssefa Miava, the head of ESCAP's Sub-Regional Office from the Pacific, joining us from Suva. Ms. Alice Jabana will begin by providing an overview of the report's key findings before we move on to the Q&A. You can ask questions while the presentation is ongoing through the YouTube channel, for which there are links on the UN ESCAP website, or you can send us an email at escap-scas@un.org. That's escap, ESCAP-scas, SCAS@un.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at UNESCAP using the hashtag #OceansAP. That's at UNESCAP, #OceansAP. We'll collect your questions and put them to our panelists at the end of the presentation. Please do state your name and organization when asking questions. Now, with that, and with thanks again, can I hand over to our Under-Secretary General. Ms. Alice Jabana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the introductory remarks. A very good morning, good afternoon to colleagues, friends, and viewers, especially in the Asia-Pacific region as well as the rest of the world. Welcome to the launch of ESCAP, a theme study report, Changing Sails, Accelerating Regional Actions for Sustainable Oceans in Asia and the Pacific. It is indeed my pleasure to launch the report as well as introduce the report by presenting the key highlights of issues, challenges, as well as recommendation. So may I now share the presentation. Yes, so I hope all of you can view the slides clearly. But before going into the highlights, issues, challenges, and recommendation, may I briefly introduce about ESCAP, especially for those of you who are not that familiar with ESCAP. So ESCAP is a regional commission covering Asia Pacific, and our work focuses on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And each year, in May, we convene at the commission session countries in Asia Pacific to agree on regional responses on shared challenges. And for this year's theme study, which is the 76th Commission session, countries, member states agreed last year that we should look at ocean, especially on the regional cooperation angle of the various issues related to economic, social, and environmental cooperation on oceans to support sustainable development. So therefore, now I would like to share with all of you the key main findings of the report, challenges identified, as well as recommendation going forward, especially to forge closer regional cooperation. Why ocean? Because ocean and its resources are the lifeline of Asia Pacific and closely linked to sustainable development. And yet, all of us know that ocean health is very fragile. especially due to the impact on climate change. Yeah? It has caused declining ocean ecosystem, whereas ocean itself absorb about 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, this is the average data since 1980. And especially also the impact on this climate change, ocean related, on SIDS, small island development states, countries such as in the Pacific, as well as coastal areas and communities. Yeah, not and also not to mention, yeah, other impact directly or indirectly, yeah, on the health of our planet. So this is both a very short run as well as a longer term issues of sustainable development. So let me start by looking more closely at the first issue, which relates to data and statistics. State of ocean data. Again, if you look at goal 14 of SDG, there are actually 10 indicators, but unfortunately only 2 of the indicators that the data are readily available, which are on marine pollution and conservation of coastal areas. What about the other 8? The other 8, no data are readily available, which shows that significant knowledge gaps remain in issues related to ocean acidification, fisheries and fishing related activities, as well as the economic benefits to small island developing states and the least developed countries. And then also, even for those that data are available, which is on marine pollution and conservation of coastal areas, we see the color is yellow, which means that the progress, SDG-related progress, is not on track. We need to accelerate the progress on these 2 indicators to achieve the SDG target. And then if you look at the next slide, which shows basically the health related issues of our ocean, both on the exclusive economic zones areas, the left-hand side map, and also as well as in the high seas areas. In both cases, again, ocean health is showing deterioration, decline in both areas. So therefore, a stronger push is needed, on how, to mitigate the impact of climate change, or therefore to have a better health situation on our ocean. So this relates directly to the need, the urgent need to have data on oceans. How we can have concerted action to mitigate this impact on climate change on both the exclusive economic zone and high seas if we don't have data. And then, so therefore, it is very clear, several immediate recommendation is we need this regional cooperation in ocean-related data and statistics because of insufficient methodology, limited country-level experience, as well as high costs of collecting data, especially across the economic exclusive zone. And also, we see that countries that need data the most also are the countries that have the least data. So therefore, to accelerate this urgent needs and action, we need very much this regional collaboration. Let me now turn to the second issues, which is on maritime connectivity, and also especially on the state of maritime shipping. Shipping has been the backbone of economic development in the region. Asia represents the largest portion of global seaborne trade. But again, yes, some countries in the sub-region, for example, the Pacific countries, have been experiencing low level of connectivity due to many reasons, including remoteness, of the geographic location of the countries, as well as lack of economies of scale. And then other issues relate to especially in Asia. Asia has the highest number of shipping-related casualties and accidents worldwide. So this is related to the shipping. And third is the maritime shipping itself adversely has affected the marine ecosystem. And then what are the opportunities that then we can relate that to regional cooperation? Again, how to better connect or have this maritime connectivity to be better linked to local and regional value chain. And then second, also, this is a more integrated concept, not only the shipping itself, but also the port system, how to then scale up the smart port system to enable to support efficient and green shipping. But then again, of course, investment, new investment are much needed. So therefore, the opportunities to develop more public-private partnership scheme, as well as the innovation and alternative energy measures to advance the decarbonization of this industry and also offer clean solutions. Again, the importance of regional cooperation, because no countries can do that alone, as well as how to close this maritime connectivity gap, how for countries, industries to commit, not only to commit, but to implement the already there, actually, the set of global IMO regulations for countries and industries to achieve safe and green maritime transport. But then, of course, understandably, that countries need their capacities to manage it, to be enhanced or to be developed further, as well as the need for a regional platform to have this dialogue, because all the stakeholders, it's not only about government or industry, but all the stakeholders have to come together to dialogue, to foster the partnership and the cooperation needed. Let me now turn to the third topic, which is on sustainable fishing or fisheries. Again, the background is that Asia and the Pacific is the source, or the world's largest producer of fish. You name it, any type of fish. You can see from the screen that it shows here, the issues, that the percentage of stocks fish unsustainable levels has increased more than threefold, which is shown clearly on the screen. If we see the data back then, I don't know, this is 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, the stocks fish unsustainable levels was only at 10%, but more recently it has increased threefold to about or a little more than 30%. And then the main threats to marine fisheries are overfishing, environmental degradation, and the IUU, or the irregular, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Again, yeah, all these interlink quite closely to the impact of climate change, yeah, which I'm going to also say a little more later. And then what are, again, that those are challenges, and what are the opportunities, yeah, for countries as well as for regional cooperation. One is certainly data, yeah, because the data issues also relevant in this fishery issues. So generating complete data on fish stocks, fighting IUU fishing activity, and conserving marine areas are the clear priorities. But then how to translate, yeah, that clear priorities to the set of recommendations, yeah, before we go to the regional cooperation. Again, how to have effective country level regulation and management. Yeah, that's one at the country level for this good fisheries governance. And then second, how to harmonize the national statistics, right? Of course, the capacity building and that particular issues, yeah, need to be addressed first, and then next comes the need to harmonize national statistics to ensure consistent and quality data on fish stocks. And then on the marine protected areas, yeah, which is very important to prevent the decline of marine biodiversity and ensure sustainable and economic co-benefits. So with that, it's very clear, yeah, that we have ample, yeah, urgent issues to foster a regional cooperation. Yeah, again, relate that to the already out there, the various international multilateral agreements. For example, those under FAO, yeah, for fisheries related international agreements. So the issue is more on how to strengthen the implementation, yeah, as well as how to better monitor the issues such as IUU, and also how to protect and promote stakeholder interests and the use and the sustainable use of the ocean. Now I come to the last, but not the least, yeah, important issues related to marine plastic and debris. And why this is so extremely urgent, again, because for our region, because Asia Pacific produces half of the world's plastic first, yeah, not yet the debris or the plastic pollution. So the region produces half of plastic production by volume, and the region also contributes around 38% the global plastic consumption. Yeah, so global production half, but global consumption 38%. And the issue is also, yeah, the issue is also the waste, plastic waste, in terms of marine plastic and debris. Yeah, apparently our region also contribute significantly to the plastic, the marine plastic debris pollution and wastage. Yeah, and major factor that causing this problem is many, not only the production of the plastic, the consumption because of lifestyle or the behavior of the consumer, that they throw away the plastic, they do not, they didn't recycle, reuse, yeah, and also weak governance, especially on the waste management related aspect. Yeah. So, but before I turn to the next slide, I just want to highlight to you the slide, yeah, on the screen that shows the trajectory, right? The red line shows, yeah, if we don't do anything, business as usual, then we have, how do you say it, yeah? Just going to explode, just going to explode, yeah? But if we do something, but, you know, basically a little bit, yeah, maybe some initiative, how to mitigate, yeah, how to reduce, yeah, this plastic, well, stagnant, the blue line. But if we have a transformative action, yeah, at all front, production, consumption, waste management, change in lifestyle, change in social norm, then yeah, we can be a little bit successful. This is what we are hoping, yeah, that we could achieve the green line trajectory going towards 2015. So therefore, the opportunities, but as well as the challenges is, again, the various stream, yeah, the production, consumption, and as well the waste management, but basically we need transformative ocean action. Yeah. And then for that, we need definitely, because nobody can do it by themselves, no country can do it by themselves, yeah. And more importantly, to implement, we need concrete action. We need best practice. We need lessons learned. We need exchange of information. We need to scale up cross-border initiative and innovation. We need to strengthen, yes, stakeholder commitment through dialogue. Yes, so that, and with that, then we hope that we can achieve, yeah, several fronts at the same time, simultaneously, including the change in social norm, very important, yeah, because this is about our environmental sustainability, ocean related, but I think this is, we are talking about larger objective, yeah, a larger vision of sustainable development. Last note, last point, I'm sure viewers are very much curious, yeah. So what would, you know, the impact of COVID-19? Yeah, of course, COVID-19 has a huge significant impact in all walks of life. But again, related to ocean, as I alluded earlier at the start, yeah, of the presentation. So this is more, yeah, about the longer term issue, development challenges related to climate change. It's also related directly to COVID-19. Yeah, why we have this pandemic? Why we have this pandemic? Yeah, that's a very basic question, right? Yeah, maybe our lifestyle, yeah, cannot support the sustainable environment, yeah, the sustainable planet, yeah, anymore. Yeah, so that's why this onset of epidemic, pandemic, and so on. And one of the key to that is a healthy ocean. So with that, let me hand over to Paul. Paul, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Armida. And if I can kindly ask you to mute to stop sharing your slides, mute your computer, that would be great. Thank you very much for that clear overview and for walking us through so clearly those findings. I think we're saying goodbye to you now and turning to the panelists, and we're going to turn to our Q&A section. For those of you asking questions either by email or on our YouTube channel, can I remind you to please state your name and the organization you work for. And let's go immediately to our first question. And the first question is from the Sustainability Times editor. And he or she states, plastic pollution of the oceans has reached endemic proportions and is largely fueled by a few nations in Asia. And the question is, what steps are these nations taking, or should they be taking, that could give us hope in seeking to tackle the problem? And if I could first put that question to Manuel, please, from a pollution perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, for that question, and I think it's very appropriate to just to highlight that we are very optimistic at this point, because as our executive secretary rightly put in the 3 scenarios that we see there is a green path if we do transformative actions in the region that could help us plank the curve and actually reach a scenario where the emissions of plastics into the ocean actually decline. I want to highlight that we have seen in the region some local or national legislations that are meant to tackle marine pollution. However, these legislations are at a point that are just like piecemeal legislations, and we haven't seen a pan-Asian strategic approach to the problem. There are some good signals from the region. For instance, I can highlight the ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris, which is a very comprehensive approach to addressing this in the ASEAN region. And also some other work that has been carried out by our colleagues at the United Nations Environment Program, the Sea Circular Initiative, for instance, from the COP-C, who were actually strategic partners in the preparation of this report. We can still see a little bit more. As our introductory presentation has highlighted, we see the need for more regional cooperation in Asia, and this could come in the term of single-use plastic bans, or for the implementation of some incentives and disincentives to discourage the demand and production of plastics. This is still to be seen in the region, and we're going to be working closer with our member states to develop better policies, and also to have a more effective implementations of the policies that have already been enacted. We have some very good examples at a region-wide level. For instance, I can point to the European Union Directive from 2019/904 that addresses the single-use plastics at a region-wide level. And I see the opportunity in Asia Pacific to do some similar work. Also, I want to highlight that most of our member states are also parties to the Basel Convention, and this is another positive sign that we're moving in the right direction. So I am hopeful. I think that the report has highlighted some positive signs, and also strategic pathway towards reaching that green light with a scenario where we actually curb the plastic debris. Over to you.
Thank you, Manuel. And maybe I could ask Josefa to complement that answer from a Pacific angle. Josefa.
Thank you very much, Paul. One of the things I just wanted to add to what Manuel said is that even though the Pacific is not a major source of plastic waste, it is nevertheless very active in trying to stem the flow of plastics out into the waters, into the sea, and like in other parts of the world, has developed a regional framework with which to deal with this issue. And that's the Pacific Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter, 2018 to 2025. And I think it is important to take into consideration the overall cooperation, the frameworks that subregions have dealing with issues such as plastic. The other thing I want to note here is that the Pacific Islands Forum leader obviously see the issue of plastics as related to fisheries. And they see plastics as one of the risks, as one of the threats to fisheries, which is something that's very important to the Pacific.
Thank you very much for that. And I think now I would like to continue with Josefa. I have a very broad-based question from J Invest Consulting coming in from the private sector. What constitutes ocean health? And again, Josefa, I think your perspective from the Pacific might be a good place to start.
Yeah, obviously the first point to start with is as the Under-Secretary General Executive Secretary underscored, the issue of climate change is considered by the Pacific as its biggest threat, as its existential threat. And so the impact that climate has on the oceans is of great concern. On fisheries, for example, the impact of warmer air and sea surface temperatures, ocean acidification, rising sea levels and greater rainfall are expected to reduce significantly the habitats and the shelter and food for the coastal fish and seashells. In the long run, this is going to cause further deterioration to coastal fisheries. The other dimension of this threat is that due to climate change, tuna in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean, which is, by the way, the biggest producer of tuna in the world, that's where about between 55 and 60% of the tuna that's supplied to the world is produced. So the Pacific has a lot of contribution to the world economy in that regard. That tuna, because of climate change, is going to move progressively to the east and into the high seas, where because of not having as good a control as in the EEZ, is going to result in some overfishing, and where the distant water fishing nations, which are generally the more responsible for climate change, need not pay fishing access fees. So that's one dimension of the way the Pacific Island countries see the health of oceans. The other important thing to consider is that the oceans is a big contributor to the Pacific economies. I think we have a situation where 8 to 6% of the GDP in Kiribati comes from fisheries. 9 to 4% GDP in Tuvalu comes from fisheries. 4.1% from, in the case of RMI. It is also a major contributor to food security and livelihoods in the Pacific. As you know, the Pacific consume 2 to 3 times more than the average global consumption. So obviously, when there's a deterioration in oceans and the fish stocks, it does affect the health of Pacific Islands.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to move on straight away with the next question, while reminding all panelists to turn on their cameras, please. The next question is from Ankit Srivastava from the New Delhi Times. And Ankit wants to know, what are the challenges that states face in harmonizing their national legislation and policies in accordance with the major international instruments and framework on protecting oceans and the marine environment? Oliver, I wonder if I could turn to you first on that one, please.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you also to the New Delhi Times for this question. I think one of the main problems is the lack of coordination and cooperation, both within and among responsible authorities. And this is clearly a fundamental challenge, both in prioritizing policies nationally and strategies. There are several management problems which are related to the implementation of multilateral agreements in national jurisdictions. These would include, for instance, the inadequacy of national fisheries laws and regulations to fully incorporate obligations derived from such agreements. Another issue is, for instance, weak enforcement of existing legal frameworks. For one, many countries have yet to take necessary steps to become a party and implement international instruments, such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, also the 1995 United Nations Fish Stocks Agreement, or the 2009 FAO Agreement on Port State Measures. There are also challenges concerning transparency and traceability of fish catch. Maybe I can give you one example, which we can see, for instance, in subsidies. Many governments use subsidies as a fisheries development tool. Some major fishing economies continue to subsidize their distant water fleets, which makes it very difficult for domestic fishing fleets to compete, and that can create an overcapacity in fishing as well. Subsidies are often granted on fuels and boats. Let's look at fish trawlers. These are a vital source of income for people who are employed in the fisheries sector. Yet many of these vessels engage in indiscriminate fishing. One important reason among many that this is possible is that many governments exempt their fuel expenses from taxes, which can be up to several hundred litres a day. Now, without the subsidy, the trawlers wouldn't be able to fish as much as they do. And although they wouldn't be able to employ as many people as they do either, this would clearly reduce overfishing if we didn't have these subsidies. This could be a prime example, for instance, of the lack of cooperation within and among responsible authorities that I mentioned earlier, and where measures taken for the conservation and management of stocks in areas under national jurisdictions and in the adjacent high seas are not necessarily compatible and coherent with other national policies. Finally, maybe I can point to the issue of data sharing and the collection and harmonization and use of fisheries data. Data supporting larger transboundary industrial scale fisheries, such as tuna, is often comprised by national confidentiality rules, which restricts the resolution that information can be made available to third parties. Now, without significant changes to national laws and incentives, it's unlikely that access to current confidential data will materialize in the future. So these are maybe two examples that highlight the difficulty of adjusting or needing to adjust national laws to be able to comply a little bit more with international instruments and frameworks. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Oliver. That was very clear. Can I turn to Ajar to see whether there's anything you'd like to add from a transport connectivity perspective on that question?
Yes, Paul, sure. And I'll be happy to elaborate a bit more because as highlighted in the theme study and mentioned by our Executive Secretary, in terms of protecting the ocean, shipping has made quite a lot of progress. And we have the championship of leadership by the International Maritime Organization, who has joined their forces with us in the preparation of the theme study. And I would like to acknowledge their great contribution. And what we have seen in our dialogue and our joint work with the IMO, but also with other UN agencies working in shipping, is that there are still, even though those global regulations exist, and there is a model, let's say, national legislation for more sustainable shipping practices, there is still not a universal acceptance of many standards and practices and instruments that are available. And of course, the situation is different according to a country or a subregion, so no one is in the same conditions. But let me just highlight maybe 2 or 3 elements that we see as quite prevailing in Asia Pacific. First of all, it's certainly the institutional human capacities of some of our member states, because the marine pollution, or let's say the protection of marine ecosystem from shipping, is a quite technical and comprehensive field. We're not just speaking about CO2 emissions, we're speaking of all different types of air pollution, we're speaking about the pollution by the ballast waters, we're speaking about marine debris and plastic pollutions generated by the ship. So it's quite a comprehensive field. And to that, you can add the variety of impact by the port activities. So to catch up with this and identify the priorities and which tools and instruments are of particular relevance to a country requires dedicated human institutional capacities. And I think that's where UNESCO work comes in instrumental in enhancing the country's capacity to benefit from the regulations that exist. So the first, I would say, item to highlight is institutional human capacity. The second, and we have to be quite upfront about this, is that, of course, moving to a more sustainable shipping means moving away from some established shipping and port practices. It has upfront costs, it has delays before the benefits are reaped. So you need to bring the industry on board. You need to have your local stakeholders and local industries acceptance of those standards. And as Asia, and it was mentioned by our Executive Secretary, Asia is the major stakeholder, the major actor in the shipping, the ships are built in Asia, they are scrapped in Asia, the ports in Asia, one of the busiest ports in the world. So it's quite a strong shift from established practices, and this buy-in of all stakeholders and in industry in particular is a second element that sometimes complicates or slows down the progress in accepting global regulations. And then the third element that is specific to maritime shipping is the fact that the enforcement of those global regulations still stays with the very localized actors. It is flag states, or port authorities that have the burden of ensuring the compliance with the global regulations, that effectuate the control and sort of make sure that these targets and regulations become a reality. And again, we come here at the issue of capacity and financial resources, human institutional frameworks that are needed to make sure that we make the global regulations and conventions of IMO a reality in the region. So over to you, Paul. I hope that gave perspective from the maritime shipping side.
Super, thank you very much, Ajar. And now I'm going to move on to a question from Noor Yasmin from the Jakarta Globe. And Noor asks, why is data important to accomplish ocean sustainability? How can countries such as Indonesia improve their oceanic data? And I think that's a question that falls squarely in your camp, Rike. Rike, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks to Jakarta Globe for the question. Now, the first part of the question, why is data so important for ocean sustainability? Well, mainly it's important for all of us to make the right policy decisions. And I believe the current pandemic illustrates very well how important data is for urgent and appropriate decision making. We are all witnessing how daily data updates feeds directly into debates by parliaments and decisions by governments all over the globe. Now, if a similar situation should require that kind of data on the oceans, we would not have a response. We need much better data to understand what's going on. How is human activity impacting the oceans? How are ocean services bringing values to societies? And the study is mentioning a lot of the benefits we are all getting from the oceans and ecosystem services from the oceans, such as food, job, culture, recreation, tourism, trade, shipping, etc., etc. At the moment, we do not have a system to properly place value on this and also link it back to what it actually does for the state of the ocean and the ability of the ocean in future to bring those kind of services. Now, in order to get that understanding, we need much better and much more data. That's obvious. We need data both from the science community and from the statistical community on the socio-economic state of our society in order to link the different aspects here. It doesn't stop with the data, though. We also need to agree on the concepts, the definitions, the terminology we use when we want to measure issues related to the oceans. And we've already in the Q&A had a few examples of this. Well, what do we mean by ocean health? If we don't have an agreed definition of a concept like this, we cannot analyze trends in ocean health and agree on the results. If we don't have a common understanding of what do we mean when we say ocean economy, then anyone can put some data on the table and your neighbor might be able to put exactly the opposite data on the table. So this is the reason the theme study calls not only for more data and sharing of data, but also harmonization and standardization of data related to oceans. So moving to the second part of the question, what can countries such as Indonesia do about this? Well, first I should say that Indonesia is in a very good position they have a very capable and very active National Statistical Office, the BPS. BPS has been at the forefront of adjusting their statistical production to suit the data demands of the 2030 agenda. They have adjusted their data collections. They have introduced new data collections to make sure that data, when processed, can be used to follow the trends of our achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is something that all countries can do. It requires investments in our national statistical systems. Data is not always easy and cheap to come by. And this in particular also is the case for the oceans. Another thing countries can do is to strengthen institutional partnerships. Now, this has already been mentioned by you, Azar, in the context of the question that was raised to you. It certainly also is the case for data. It's such that national statistical systems comprise numerous institutions that are involved in data. At the moment, we have gaps where institutions in the science sphere and in the ocean sphere are not included at the moment. So extending institutional partnerships to include, for example, national oceanographic centers is something that would really improve the ability of countries to generate appropriate data on oceans and the sustainable development of the ocean. I would also recommend countries to be very, very active in international work. By the way, as BPS Indonesia is at the moment, until, for example, until 2018, Indonesia chaired ESCAP's Committee on Statistics. And the reason to engage in international work relates to what I said before, the need for internationally agreed concepts, definitions, and standards when we talk about data and statistics on the ocean. It's only through engagement by countries that we can make sure that international standards are fit for purpose, also to the needs of each individual country. Now, when we talk about the ocean, the international work of most relevance at the moment was one of the things the Executive Secretary mentioned in her presentation, the work on environmental economic accounting, including ecosystem accounting. This is global work that's going on now exactly for us to be able to integrate data about the society and the oceans. And a new partnership on ocean accounting, the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership, has been formed with the dedicated purpose of making sure that ocean ecosystems are included in this international work on ecosystems broadly. And I would encourage countries to engage with this partnership, test the emerging standards as they are being refined. We need the experiences from national levels to end up with a global framework that makes sense for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricky. That's great. And now I've got a question coming in from Akmin Ahmed from Dawn, Pakistan. And Akmin wants to know, what measures can ESCAP suggest to countries so that they can meet emergencies like COVID-19? How can governments ensure that they keep their ports open, as the pandemic is a good reminder of how crucial ports are to function in this era and for a modern society? And I think I'm going to turn straight to Ajar for an answer on that question, please. Ajar, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for this question, which is so heart and burning right now. And I'm pleased to say that, and of course, ESCAP is closely monitoring and engaging with the countries on a COVID-19 response in all sectors and in transport and shipping in particular. And as we were monitoring the response, we were pleased to see the great efforts made by our member states in keeping their ports operational and open to trade, which is, as the question mentions, is key for COVID response now, and then the recovery in its aftermath. So let me share with you perhaps a few key elements that we can see in the country's response and what is working. And again, I draw here not just on ESCAP's work, but on the advice and tools available from our partners for the shipping chapter, IMO and UNCTAD. UNCTAD has worked quite extensively on ports, and they've also released a few overviews on what ports are doing faced with the pandemics. So let me summarize that in three key elements. First of all, you protect the port workers, and not just the shipping and the ship personnel, but the ports are big administrations. There are a lot of people are involved in making the trade and goods move through ports. So those essential personnel, they need to be protected. They need the security and safety needs to be ensured. And there are tools and regulations in place, including from IMO, or how you reach that. So first, the element, of course, protect your port personnel, because as your ports are vulnerable to different elements, to different risks now. And there are very good ways to do it. And technology and digitalization, smart ports that were mentioned by our executive secretary earlier today, those are the ways that you can enable social distancing, you can enable contactless delivery, contactless controls, and so forth. So protect your personnel using the new technology, go digital, go for smart port solution. So that's the first element. The second element I would highlight is that as you restrict some of the movements, which you have to because of the situation, you also facilitate. You streamline your procedures at the ports. There's still room to make their port operations and controls more seamless, less invasive, less, let's say, time consuming. And it's good business solution at the best of time. And it's crucial during the pandemics. You have reduced human resources. You want to minimize the exposure again. So you facilitate as you restrict. That's the second piece of advice that we could gather. And the third is that you coordinate. You coordinate bilaterally, multinational, you coordinate with your neighbors. We've seen a lot of transport response to COVID-19 being taken in a way unilaterally. And while it was a good solution, if it had been coordinated or timed together with your key partners or your neighbors, it would have yielded better results. So you coordinate internationally and you coordinate domestically. And this is one of the key takeaways that we see from the COVID-19 pandemics. Ports they don't operate in isolation. They're part of their hinterland connections. They're part of the global, the national and regional transport networks. And unfortunately, we have seen a lot of backlogs in ports, a lot of congestions that has been generated, not because the ports were not operational, but because the connections with the hinterland, the road, rail, and other transport operations were halted due to the lockdown measures. So this line between domestic and international freight in the time of a pandemic is quite blurred and needs to be, the measures need to be coordinated at all levels. So this is what we can offer as of now with the word of support and recognition for the great work that our countries have been doing in protecting the ports from the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajar. That was super. And if I can now, if you like, zoom out, turn the telescope around and ask a question from Channel News Asia. And they want to know, how pressing are the issues affecting our oceans when it comes to climate change? And I think really on that, I have to go to the Pacific first. How pressing are these issues affecting our oceans when it comes to climate change, Youssefa?
Thanks, Paul. I think in terms of the impact of climate change on oceans, as I said, that's a serious concern for the Pacific because of the dependency that they have on the ocean. And We've discussed already how climate change is going to affect fish stocks, the habitats, and the shelters of fish and seashells, and the movement of the tuna stocks. So that is one of the reasons why the Pacific is very concerned about ensuring that the climate and ocean nexus is not forgotten, that the Pacific leaders want to address climate change together with oceans for that reason. And the issue of transport obviously is of concern as well, even though it's not the biggest emitter. The ships, nevertheless, there are some concerns that if checks are not put in place, and if the recovery out of COVID it does not include further reduction of the use of fossil fuel, then that is going to become a problem in the future.
Thank you, very clear. Maybe Manuel, you would like to complement that from a plastics angle, where climate change intersects with the pollution issue. Manuel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Just to add to what Josefa just mentioned, we need to think about the plastic problem as an industry. And we're talking about a $1.2 trillion industry in the world. And this just represents 3.3 times the GDP combined of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, just for you to have an idea. So before we have the problem of marine debris, you need to think about everything else that happens on land. And that's where everything really starts, right? If you analyze the whole life cycle of plastics, you should pay closely attention to the carbon emissions, the whole footprint in the value chain of plastic production. And in this regard, we see an estimation of 1.7 gigatons of CO equivalent in 2015, and this is projected to increase to 6.5 gigatons of CO equivalent by 2050. So if we continue with this trend, we are contributing to an acceleration of climate change, which is already at a crisis level. And this affects the ocean as the production of plastics, but also once it reaches the ocean, because we need to remember that the ocean absorbs approximately between 25 and 30% of the carbon dioxide emissions in the world. So we are not really helping the ocean mitigate or moderate that ocean warming action if we continue with the production of plastics on land. So in the report, we highlight the findings of the IPCC special reports on the ocean and the cryosphere. We think those findings are alarming, and we should consider that there's a very strong connection with the ocean and climate, and this includes, of course, the production of plastic in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. And now I'd like to go to a question from Habibullah Habib from BPS Statistics Indonesia. And the question is, how can we get more data or get data on the 38% of global plastics consumed in the Asia-Pacific region? How can we give granularity to that figure? And Rikke, maybe I could start with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, and thanks to Habib from BPS for the question. Now, the source of this figure, which is quoted in the theme study, is a 2018 report by UNEP, where what they have done in order to be able to estimate these figures is to trace global plastics value chains. So this is the way these figures have been generated. And it's actually a very good illustration of how data and statistics at the moment are being pulled together to be able to at least to some minimal extent trace the progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 14. It is only through extremely active involvement of the so-called international custodian data agencies, of which the United Nations Environment Programme is one, that we are able to have just some data to trace. There is a a global coalition of countries, national statistical systems, and international custodian agencies that are doing what they can to collect, process, and develop measures for the data on the oceans. And one of the many indicators we are not in a position to monitor on a regular basis at the moment is the indicator that relates to plastic and plastic debris, which is included in the internationally agreed indicator framework for this sustainable development goal. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very clear. If I could turn to a question from Nisha, who's writing in from Green News, an environmental news agency from Thailand. Without the UN Ocean Conference, she asks, what can we expect, and how will the absence of this conference affect the regional action in Asia and the Pacific? So without this conference, what will happen? What will happen to regional action in Asia and the Pacific? Well, we've got our own commission coming up, which hopefully will galvanize action in Asia and the Pacific. But Manuel, maybe you'd like to say a few words in response to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Of course, we are very sad that due to the current lockdown and travel restrictions, the UN Ocean Conference for 2020 has been postponed. However, it hasn't been canceled, nor has all the regional work that we are promoting through ESCAP. So I do hope that the conference will take place either at some point later this year or early next year. We don't have the exact dates yet, but we're working closely with our partners from the New York office who are organizing this conference. And just one of the initiatives that we are planning right now to make sure that we keep this momentum alive is we're organizing a webinar that is going to take place the very same week that we were going to have the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon. So you are, of course, invited to participate. We also continue the work with our member states through the commission session that focuses on promotion development through the ocean. And we have a series of stakeholder engagements throughout the year, just to mention the Asia Pacific Day for the Ocean, which offers another opportunity for everyone to actively engage in ocean-related matters. And this includes not only plastic, but all the different issues that we have talked about. So the multi-stakeholder activities do not have to stop because the UN conference has been postponed. We should actually be working harder to make sure that when we reach the new date of the Ocean Conference, we have more to bring to the table in one of the 8 interactive dialogues, and which include the different items that we have been discussing today and that are reflected also in the theme study. So this work doesn't stop. We're just facing these temporary restrictions, and we do hope that that all the challenges of our region will be well represented in Lisbon whenever that happens in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. And I think we can squeeze in a last question here from a consultancy company, J Invest. And the question is, since speakers highlighted that the ocean bears the cost of negative externalities, like global CO2 emissions, how do you think global collaboration should be facilitated with between all countries? Or is it only the responsibility of countries that have access to the ocean? And I'd like to turn to Ajar to that from a shipping perspective, but then maybe Josefa, you'd like to say a few words for the Pacific on that. Ajar, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And I think that's a question that allows to wrap up a bit of our conversation in terms of the regional and global action that is needed. And from the shipping perspective, let me give you perhaps an example of how the ocean, protecting oceans is the work of everyone's involved, all countries on our planet. Let me take the example of landlocked countries which without access to the sea, who are nevertheless participant of the global trade, and in fact access to oceans, to shipping, to ports for landlocked countries through transit routes and through access to ports in their transit countries has been an issue on the UN and the development agenda. So those countries can benefit from this natural transport resource that is our oceans. So in that sense, I would say the link and the responsibility for protecting the oceans is clearly lies with all countries involved, not just those with access to sea, independently of the range of that access. The global trade serves everyone, and of course the cost of trading globally also need to be borne, of course with the appropriate level of responsibilities and knowing what is under control of certain countries, what is not, but it's certainly especially as far as shipping is concerned, responsibility at the global level. And it lends itself perfectly. And in fact, it's indispensable to think about global cooperation as we talk about shipping. So that's just a few words from the shipping perspective. Over to you.
Thank you, Ajar. Youssefa, would you like to say a few words from your perspective? Sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you there, Youssefa. Could you please turn your mic on?
Yeah, sorry. The Pacific is one of the greatest supporters of multilateralism, naturally because of the small sizes and the issue with isolation. So the need for multilateral cooperation is perhaps greater for the smaller members than for the bigger ones. But the Pacific has some achievements to be proud of. SDG 14, I don't think would have been possible without the leadership of the Pacific Island countries in New York in the negotiation. The second point I want to make is that supporting multilateralism doesn't mean that you don't do anything at the regional or sub-regional level. In fact, last year, the Pacific Islands Forum issued the strongest climate change declaration ever because they obviously feel the need to strengthen the efforts at the sub-regional level, at the Pacific level, to advocate and to negotiate for a better climate deal. And they call it Urgent Climate Change Action Now. That was the declaration they issued last year. So the last point is this idea of strengthening multilateralism through stronger regional cooperation. Obviously, we've had some concerns, some questions about the commitment to multilateralism in the case of climate change, and obviously there is a need for the regions to strengthen their cooperation in order to make up for any deficit or any weakness that might be becoming apparent with the multilateral system. That's not to say that we forget about the multilateral effort. No, we continue to push, but we have to be realistic and do our best at the regional and sub-regional level to strengthen this debate and advocacy and effort for more urgent climate action. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much. And look, I know we need to wrap up, but we've just had a couple of final questions that I want to try and squeeze in, if I can abuse just a couple of more minutes of my panelists' time. And we've got one coming in from Raj from Oxfam, who says the private sector play a big role in the production and consumption of plastics. How can we better work with business platforms as part of our regional cooperation framework? So, can I go to Manuel on that one, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. This is a great question, and I just want to briefly highlight that we cannot accomplish any effective results in the region if we not engage all stakeholders. And this includes, of course, the private sector, because they are key players in the production of plastic. Now, member states are key players when it comes to enacting legislations that can deter the demand for plastics. However, the private sector can anticipate these legislations and actually foster innovation, because this should be seen as an opportunity for businesses to actually expand their markets or explore new markets. And we need innovation. We need scientific developments to come up with sustainable alternative to plastics, and private companies can certainly support this process. They don't have to wait for the legislations to exist in their respective countries. They can start offering consumer sustainable options. And we already see some progress in this regard. ESCAP works closely with a Sustainable Business Network, and we actually have a meeting with them on Friday where we will be promoting the same messages to make sure that the private sector is supporting these initiatives and actually working closer with ESCAP to make some progress in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, that's clear. And this, I think, really will be our final question. We end with a very precise one from Siti Zakia from DOS Malaysia. And their question is, how can we integrate the international maritime law between countries to overcome the ocean data gap? And I'm going to turn first to Rikke, but maybe Ajar, you might want to say a couple of words on that too afterwards. Rikke, over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul, and thanks to Siti from DOS Malaysia for the question. And actually, what I would say, I leave the specifics on the maritime law to my dear colleague, but in general, these international laws really present great opportunities to pool data, both data sharing, but also to pull work and push work to agree on definitions. We see a number already of international and regional agreements having attached frameworks for assessing progress towards implementing the provisions of the law. This is seen by a number of multilateral environmental agreements as well, and of course one prominent example is the 2030 agenda, which is with its very, very large indicator framework. So accompanying international law with measurement framework to progress is for me really a very, very powerful opportunity presented by these laws and agreements. And then over to you, Asa.
Yes. Thank you, Rikke, and it is a very concrete question. And if I may share, I would say I would go along two lines of response. First of all, I'm very happy that this question picked up the data gaps as far as oceans are concerned. I would have to admit that shipping, among other transport modes, is usually considered to be quite a data-driven. I would say it lends itself to data-driven analysis. We get data on the global shipping trends, but there are many gaps that we see in terms of countries, individual countries coverage, and the Pacific could be an example of this, the access of information we have on the shipping in terms of the way our indicators are conceived, because they are not fit for purpose for some very specific situations in terms of shipping and capturing the richness of the situation, but mostly in terms of the new pressing issues related to the climate change. I would have to say that we are much more equipped to measure some efficiencies and productivity of ports as such than, for instance, perhaps energy efficiency in our ports or on our shipping vessels. And there I would go along the lines, and that's the second element of what Rikke has just said. There is much we can do if we first agree on the definitions, and especially in the shipping sector, which is quite fragmented between shipping, maritime shipping, port activities and related activities, transport activities to ports. We could go further if we agree on what the definition is. What is exactly the emissions generated by shipping? Do we just look at the maritime side? Do we include the ports? Do we include ports as the nodes of regional and national transport systems? So we need to agree and pave ways to some definitions and methodologies. And I'm pleased to say that there are organizations that work on this. Again, I'm more UNCTAD. We are joining our forces with them to see how we can first agree on the definition, and second, enhance the data collection. And there I would see the role for international maritime law in terms of reporting, just saying this is the data you need to collect for us to be able to promote evidence-based policies. And I think that's where law and the legal obligations could play a crucial role in helping us achieve better policies. as far as shipping is concerned, but I gather from Rike's answer that it applies across the sectors as in protecting our oceans. So definitely there's more that can be done from the maritime tools, maritime law perspective in helping us understand the situation better and deal with that. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much. And I think that does really bring us to an end of our session. I'm really pleased we've been able to go broad and then narrow things down to very concrete issues too. So I'd like to thank all those that have sent in questions to us today. Let me thank again our Under-Secretary General, Ms. Alice Jabana, for her presentation, and all the panelists for their work on this report that you can download online on the ESCAP website. It's available now, and for all their very clear answers today. And we hope this will pave the way for a successful Commission session next week. If we haven't been able to get to your questions, and I know that there were a number that came in, we will get back to you in writing in the following days. And if you haven't been able to ask a question, you can still ask it to us via our email address, escap-scas@un.org. That's escap, escap-scas@un.org. Or send us a message on Twitter at UNESCAP, #OceansAP. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to hand over very briefly to my panelists, or to our panelists, to say goodbye. Thank you, and
goodbye, everyone.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Many thanks to everyone for joining us. Many thanks to our panelists, and goodbye for now. Thank you.